Welcome to Dill's History Part 7. In this episode I'm going to give you a brief history of one of Dill's old boats that my father bought and I run. Pictures associated with the story are scarce, so I have placed many pictures of Dill in days gone by in the film. I hope you enjoy watching. The boat is the Lady Beatie, owned by Harry Meakins and later in the 1960s bought by my father. The Lady Beatie was used in many rescues, saving cargo and people from ships wrecked on the Goodwin Sands. The Piave was one of her last big rescues when she saved 70 men from the ship which went aground on the West Goodwin banks. She was one of Dill's boats that went to Dunkirk, aiding the rescue of hundreds of soldiers in the Second World War, and was well known as a boat on the Dill beach. She was sold to a seaman and taken to Ramsgate after the war, where in 1960 my father saw her for sale and bought her for £300 and renamed her the Fairway. Returning to Dill Beach, she was for a time stationed at the top of Brewer Street, where I used her for angling parties. It was on one occasion when our winch had broken down and Terry Harris hauled her up onto his plot opposite the Star and Garter Hotel. A Tuesday morning saw me booked with an angling party. She was lowered down the beach ready to launch. The tide was 2 hours after high water and a very steep bank had formed with the easterly wind. The anglers arrived around 8:30 and all was made ready. The chain was slipped and she ran seaward, only to miss the lower wood and get stuck in the soft beach. Unable to float her, she was prepared for hauling up, ready to have another go. But as she was being hauled back up onto the top bank, she gave off a large crack. The steepness of the bank she was being hauled over had caused her to break her back, disabling her for many weeks. It was at this time that Sid Watson was working as a boat builder in Sandwich, so the Fairway was loaded on a trailer and taken to his boatyard, where he and I, as I had qualifications in boat building, took her old keel out and both garboard streaks and replaced them. A lot of work, but we made her like new again. Returning her to the beach on our new plots at the top of King Street, where she would again become involved in several rescues, from which the Daily Telegraph nicknamed her Dill's second lifeboat. A couple of incidents I will endeavour to describe here. The Fairway was used again for commercial trawling at night and angling parties during the day, and to start her career at a new beginning we will be with an angling party. A windy day from the southwest on a September morning saw me with a regular party of anglers from Greenwich Barracks. We launched at 9 a.m. on the high water, and on putting the engine in gear she struggled to make headway, with engine revs dying away. Cleaning out the fuel line and carburettor, as she had a Thornycroft Handy Billy petrol paraffin engine in her, I tried once more to engage gear and get underway. Nothing. She was just about making way against the wind and tide, so I decided to plod on. An hour later we arrived off Kingsdown, where we anchored and the anglers started to fish. Again I worked on the engine and everything seemed okay. We stayed anchored off Kingsdown all day and the anglers caught a good quantity of cod and pouting. The wind had freshened to a full-blown southwest gale and heavy seas were running towards the beach. Not unusual in these conditions. Up anchoring around 3:30 p.m. we started for home. But still I had no power and no speed, so with a following sea and a heavy swell we slowly made for home. On approaching the pier the seas were rolling in from the pier head to the shore and breaking, so I had to go round the pier head, knowing I must pick the right sea to go about in or we would be swamped. I was at the Coast Guard station before I managed to turn the boat around and head back up towards King Street, where the shore crew were waiting for us to come in. Large seas were still breaking and throwing up over her bow as slowly we made headway, but somehow I had to turn again when reaching the third shelter of the pier. I had to pick the right sea or we would be swamped. 3 times I tried to turn but failed, as I didn't have enough headway. Then just before reaching the pier I saw a chance. Turning the helm hard over to starboard as she slowly responded, with the full gale trying to push her back. Then I saw an enormous sea approaching from the other side of the pier, breaking into a tower of white foam. Frantically I tried to get her around with the seas under our stern, but it was too late. We were lying broadside on to the broken water when it hit us, throwing the Fairway onto her starboard beam and chucking the anglers down onto the deck. As quick as it arrived, it was gone. How we never capsized I never knew. We were still afloat, but a third full of water. The engine was still running, and slowly we made for shore, with every sea pushing her stern harder towards the beach. We had made the turn but nearly lost the boat. Hitting the beach, we were hauled out with cries from the boatmen on shore. "We thought you were a goner, Titty. You were lucky to survive that sea." I knew that as much as they did, and was pleased to be on the beach again. The problem with the engine was discovered as the Fairway was hauled out of the water. A Brussels sprout stalk was wrapped around the propeller, stopping her from getting way properly. It must have become entangled there when we launched, and we never thought of looking overboard at the screw, so it goes to show it's not always engine problems. Another occasion took place down Sandwich Bay. We'd been towing a trawl about half an hour and were just north of the Guildford Hotel, towing north about 300 yards seawards of the low water mark. It was spring tides and low water about 9 o'clock at night. Just becoming dark. Suddenly we saw 3 red flares burst into the sky about 3/4 of a mile to seaward of us, near the B2 buoy on the break sands. Still towing, we kept an eye out. It was flat calm with not a breath of wind. Another 3 flares went up in the sky. Looking at each other, Dave Trice, who was with me that night, suggested we investigate. Another 3 flares went up. We hauled the trawl and proceeded to the vicinity of the flares. Entering broken water on the break sands, another 3 flares were sent up. We were now about 200 yards from the casualty, and behind us, in the deep channel, we saw lights approaching from Ramsgate. This turned out to be the Ramsgate lifeboat. Hauling alongside the casualty, we found her with inflatable rafts in the water. She was a sailing yacht of about 50 feet in length, stuck fast on the sands by her keel, and listing heavily in the strong south-flowing tide. We advised the captain of the yacht the tide was rising fast and she would float off in about half an hour, and not to panic, as we would stay alongside him and tow him to deep water as the tide rose. Suddenly we were hit on the starboard bow by the Ramsgate lifeboat. Men boarded across us, shouting for us to get out of the way. They went astern and dragged us away from the casualty, shouting at us to leave. With no choice, we left after inspecting the bow of the Fairway, found she had suffered damage from the collision. With no option, we headed for home. Landing on the beach, my father hauled us up and inspected the damage. As expected, he wasn't happy, as it would take a few days and money to repair the bow. Father then said that the Daily Telegraph had phoned him, and they had heard of the incident and requested me to call them. It was now midnight, so I went home and called them. How they knew I never found out, but they had the story, and it was on the second page of the Daily Telegraph the next morning, headed "Trawler and Lifeboat in Salvage Dispute." We took action through a solicitor on the RNLI, but after several weeks the owner of the yacht said we were in the wrong and wouldn't leave them for the lifeboat to save. We were told later that the RNLI had dropped claims on the yacht, so we were helpless to carry on. Another day saw us launch to go trawling off Broadstairs. We had been getting some good hauls of place there and kept it quiet from the other boats where we were fishing. Arriving at the fishing grounds around 10 p.m, we were getting ready to shut the trawl when the engine died. Fruitless attempts at trying to restart it failed, so this left us with 2 options: send up a flare for assistance or row home. A long, old journey. We decided to row home. A set of oars were always carried in those days, and ones on board at the time were 13-foot long pads. Dave Trice and myself started the long haul back to Dill, where eventually, after almost 8 hours, we arrived. Heaving the Fairway up and going home for a well-earned sleep. The engine was found to have pulled a liner. It was repaired and rebuilt. Fishing continued as usual. Again, the day out with an angling party saw me and Robert Abel, who was in the Sou'wester, anchored out near the Southwest Goodwin buoy. A lovely calm summer's day. I had the same anglers from Greenwich Garrison on board, and fishing was extremely good with some nice spur dogs and large whiting being landed. As the day progressed, the wind started to freshen up hard from the sou'west. An ebb tide running and the wind against it, the seas soon became very heavy. It was 3 p.m, so the day was almost over. and myself and Robert Abel started ahead for the shore some 6 miles away. The swells were now huge and breaking as they rolled shorewards. I saw the sou'wester get caught by a broken sea and roll onto her starboard beam, almost capsizing. A course through Trinity Bay towards the Fork Buoy was our only option until we hauled closer to land. Huge following seas lifted us up and threw us rapidly forward, then we would fall into a trough, rise and ride another huge sea. The bilge pump packed up and we slowly started to fill with water as the seas broke over us. I give the anglers their due, they kept themselves busy with buckets bailing out. Passing between the Fork and the Bank Buoy, a yacht was observed firing flares. This was the first time in my career that I had to pass a casualty by and not be able to give assistance. My own boat and cargo of anglers was more important. As we passed them, they let off another flare. How helpless I felt, but the lifeboat was on its way. Arriving in shore in calmer waters, we beached without any mishap, and the anglers had had their second experience of adventure with me, but it didn't deter them. They returned for a few more years and enjoyed their days out fishing. Another day in August in the 1960s saw us launch again. The wind was nor'west and strong with a heavy sea running. It was high water around 9 p.m. in the evening. We were stationed opposite the time ball tower now. Flares were seen to be going up in the bay, and after some consideration we decided to launch. Foolish when I look back now, as seemed an impossible task to get afloat in those conditions, but we went for it. Effecting a good launch, we started steaming against the rough sea down towards the casualty. She was the trawler Gannet from Ramsgate. She was fishing in the bay when hauling her net it became tangled around her propeller. We took her in tow and made for Ramsgate Harbour, arriving there some hour and a half later. All secure and job finished, we returned home and hit the beach around 2:30 in the morning, wet through and cold. The reward for this rescue was £5 bevin. It didn't even pay for the fuel, but a boat and 2 souls were saved. The Fairway was sold in the late 1960s to Duncan Finn, a tackle shop owner. A few months after this, I sailed on the Elation, a coaster, and we were storm-bound in Rotterdam, a long story. But arriving home after this stormy trip, it seemed to have been a rough time at Deal. The sea had breached the wall during this storm, and many boats had been damaged. The Fairway was smashed up under Deal Pier, a total loss. A very sad end for a fine boat that had done so much service. I hope you enjoyed these true stories. There were many, many more, but it would take too long to tell them all. Thank you for watching.